The centurion and those who were with him guarding Jesus, upon witnessing the earthquake and the events that occurred, were extremely frightened and said, "Truly, this was the Son of God." On that dark and crucial day in history, a Roman centurion was present, overseeing the crucifixion of Jesus. This soldier was a war-hardened man, accustomed to brutality and death, but something about that specific event was about to change his life forever. His responsibility was to ensure that the execution went smoothly. He was used to following strict orders and maintaining order amidst chaos. However, that day would be extraordinarily different from any other he had ever experienced. This centurion, whose position required a cold and efficient character, was responsible for commanding 100 soldiers. His rise through the ranks of the Roman army was due to his courage, intelligence, and ability to handle extreme situations. The role he played required an ability to separate his emotions from his duties. However, the events of that day challenged this separation, forcing him to confront his own beliefs and emotions in line with the typical characteristics of Roman centurions. As he watched Jesus being led to crucifixion, the centurion could not ignore the dignity with which Jesus faced his imminent death. He was used to seeing men beg for their lives, curse their executioners, or succumb to despair. However, Jesus maintained an impressive calm, even while being tortured and ridiculed. This serenity began to plant a seed of doubt and curiosity in the centurion's heart, as described in the Bible. The crowd watching the crucifixion was in a frenzy, incited by religious leaders who wanted to see Jesus dead. For the centurion, it was just another day at work, another execution to maintain Roman peace. But as events unfolded, he began to realize that there was something unique about this execution, something that defied his understanding and began to stir his thoughts and feelings. His responsibility was to ensure that the execution went smoothly. He commanded 100 soldiers, a man who had risen through the ranks due to his courage and intelligence. However, this day would be different from any other. The task of overseeing crucifixions was for him a grim but necessary routine to maintain the order and authority of the Roman Empire. The crucifixion of Jesus, however, began to stand out from all the others he had witnessed. Jesus was taken to the praetorium, where the soldiers gathered around him, mocking and inflicting indescribable pain on him. They stripped him, put a scarlet robe on him, twisted together a crown of thorns, and set it on his head. Then they placed a staff in his hand and knelt in front of him in mockery, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They spit on him, took the staff, and struck him on the head repeatedly. The centurion, watching all this, could not help but notice the dignity of Jesus. Any other man would have begged for mercy or screamed in pain, but Jesus remained silent, enduring the suffering with a tranquility that defied human understanding. This began to affect the centurion, who, accustomed to brutality, found himself increasingly intrigued by this figure. When they finally took Jesus to be crucified, the journey through the Via Dolorosa was marked by the weight of the cross and the compassion of a crowd divided between those who mourned and those who mocked. The women of Jerusalem wept for him, and he, in the midst of his own suffering, stopped to comfort them, telling them to weep for themselves and their children. The centurion watched all this with a mixture of disbelief and admiration. Despite being accustomed to executions, the crucifixion of Jesus was not common. The centurion had overseen many executions, but the tranquility and dignity of Jesus in the face of torture awakened something in him. The execution took place at Golgotha, the place of the skull. a dreaded and well-known location for its association with cruel death. The sight of Jesus carrying his cross there, accompanied by an involuntary spectator, Simon of Cyrene, was a scene that repeated with variations. However, Jesus' behavior was unprecedented. When they arrived at the site, they nailed Jesus to the cross and lifted it between two thieves, fulfilling Isaiah's prophecy about him being counted among the transgressors. The crowd continued to mock him, and the religious leaders challenged him to come down from the cross if he were truly the Son of God. Even the criminals crucified alongside him joined in the mockery. But Jesus remained silent, demonstrating an inner strength that confused his executioners. The centurion, accustomed to the violent resistance and despair of the condemned, saw something completely different in Jesus. His prayer to the Father, asking forgiveness for those who crucified him, resonated deeply with the soldier. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." These words, spoken in the midst of agony, revealed a love and mercy that transcended human understanding, leaving the centurion deeply impressed. The centurion began to question everything he knew about strength and power. As the hours passed, nature also began to react to Jesus' suffering. Darkness fell over the earth at noon, lasting until 3 in the afternoon. This supernatural phenomenon heightened the sense of dread and reverence among those present. The centurion, seeing creation react so dramatically, was forced to recognize that something much greater was happening. Jesus, even while being mocked and beaten, remained serene. The centurion watched, impressed with the dignity and silence of Jesus, contrasting with previous executions. At the praetorium, the soldiers stripped him again, dressed him in his clothes, and led him away to be crucified. They continued to mock him, but Jesus did not respond with anger or resistance. His silence was unsettling to those accustomed to seeing the despair of the condemned. The centurion, witnessing this unusual calm, began to feel a growing discomfort. He had seen many men plead for their lives, curse their executioners, or surrender to despair. But Jesus was different. He endured the pain with a peace that defied comprehension. This serenity was not the resignation of a defeated man, but the strength of someone who knew that his suffering had a greater purpose. Jesus' prayer, asking for forgiveness for his executioners, echoed deeply in the centurion's mind. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." In the centurion's mind, he had never heard anyone pray for their enemies in such a way. This display of love and compassion starkly contrasted with the brutality of the act of crucifixion. The centurion began to question who this man was, who could love so deeply even in the midst of torture. While Jesus hung on the cross, he continued to show an unusual concern for others. He entrusted the care of his mother to the beloved disciple John, demonstrating a familial concern and a love that transcended his own pain. These acts of compassion and care in the midst of suffering deeply touched the centurion, who saw in Jesus a humanity that defied his understanding of strength and weakness. During the trial, the high priest challenged Jesus to declare himself the Son of God. Jesus firmly confirmed it, causing a profound impact on the centurion who witnessed everything. "You have said it," Jesus replied, "but I say to you all, from now on, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." Matthew 26:64. This declaration was a turning point. The high priest tore his clothes, accusing Jesus of blasphemy, which resulted in his condemnation. The centurion, present during this exchange, saw the calm and authority with which Jesus responded to the accusations. He did not defend himself or plead for mercy. Instead, Jesus declared his divinity, even knowing that this would seal his fate. This behavior was a stark contrast to that of other condemned men who often resorted to despair or denial. As Jesus was led back to the praetorium, the centurion may have reflected on what he had witnessed. Jesus' words, "You will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven," might have echoed in his mind. This vision of power and majesty seemed in complete opposition to the scene of humiliation and suffering he was witnessing. How could someone, in such a situation, speak with such certainty and authority? As Jesus faced further humiliations and tortures, his response remained unchanged. He did not curse his executioners or try to escape. Instead, he continued to demonstrate a serene strength that defied the centurion's understanding. This strength was not physical, but spiritual, and it might have started to awaken a new perception in the battle-hardened soldier. The crowd, incited by the religious leaders, demanded Jesus' crucifixion. Pilate, pressured by the crowd, handed Jesus over to the soldiers. The centurion once again observed Jesus' calm in the midst of chaos. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" echoed the cries of the crowd as Pilate washed his hands, symbolizing his attempt to absolve himself of the responsibility for condemning an innocent man. Matthew 27:24. The centurion was accustomed to violence and the bloodthirsty demands of crowds. He had witnessed many times the demand for the death of the condemned. However, the intensity of the hatred directed at Jesus was exceptional. The centurion knew that the religious leaders were behind this manipulation, inciting the crowd to ensure Jesus' execution. Although the manipulation was not new, the target of the hatred was what most disturbed the centurion. As Jesus carried his cross through the narrow streets of Jerusalem, weakened by its weight, the centurion had to intervene, ordering Simon of Cyrene to help carry the cross. This act of compassion, even though ordered by the centurion, demonstrated that despite his role as executor, he was affected by the suffering of Jesus. Reaching the place called Golgotha, Jesus was nailed to the cross, and the soldiers cast lots for his clothing, fulfilling another prophecy. The centurion, a witness to these events, saw the profound fulfillment of the scriptures, even though he did not fully understand their significance. As the hours passed, darkness covered the land from noon to 3 in the afternoon. This supernatural phenomenon terrified the centurion and the other soldiers. They knew that this was not a normal occurrence and felt that it was a divine sign. Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" This cry, full of anguish, was not only a declaration of suffering, but also a reference to Psalm 22, a prophecy about the Messiah's suffering. The centurion, hearing this cry, might have felt an overwhelming sorrow, realizing that this man was different from anyone he had ever executed. When Jesus took his last breath, saying, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit," the earth shook, rocks split, and tombs opened. The centurion, experiencing these extraordinary events, was filled with awe and terror. This was not just an ordinary execution. It was a moment that shook the heavens and the earth. The centurion, a man who had faced many battles and seen death in various forms, was confronted with a reality beyond his comprehension. The realization that he had just witnessed the death of the Son of God left an indelible mark on his soul. In the face of these overwhelming signs, the centurion declared, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." His confession was not only a recognition of Jesus' divinity, but also a moment of profound transformation in his own life.